Okay, so I want to move on to Cuba. Now, this country has been demonized to no end. I live in Florida, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, Castro, he's a horrible person, human being." Now, this is something that me and Sabby talked about, and I just want to get it from y'all because this is what I heard. Ready? Cuba is a very largely black country, and yet a lot of the Cubans that fled communism in Cuba are white Cubans. Interesting. Care to elaborate?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no one who benefited more from the revolution than the Afro-Cubans. The Cubans who had been brought over had been stolen from Africa and had been mistreated for years.
I'm y'all guys.
Yeah, it's like what George Galloway says, like in Venezuela and Cuba, like the darker the skin tone, the more likely they are to support the revolution. And I mean, if like one of my favorite wrestlers, Mijan Lopez Nunez, he's probably the greatest Greco-Roman wrestler in world history. He is a big black guy who, you know, if you think about it, in pre-1959 Cuba, he would have been working on a plantation his whole life, making money for Western plantation owners who were exploiting the crap out of Cuba. Now he's a 4-time Olympic champion and one of the greatest athletes ever. So think about all the potential of the Afro-Cuban community that the revolution unlocked by just giving them, you know, a basic standard of life and not forcing them to do plantation labor.
Yeah, this is the part about, I remember I did have to write a paper about Castro in undergrad. And this is the part I feel like a lot of people just aren't aware of because of the propaganda in the schools. Like we're taught that Castro was this brutal dictator, awful person. So we can go on and on. Same thing about the Black Panthers. We were taught it was a militant group in school. They didn't teach us about the Black Panthers doing mutual aid or the breakfast program, none of those things. But I think that it is important that people hear the other side of it and not just the Castro was this dictator who silenced people in Cuba part.
That's really, really important. You know, it's funny. Even nowadays, they even try to use the race issue in a new way. They say, "Oh, the communists in Cuba, they're racist towards Black Cubans, just like, you know, Americans," which is clearly not the case. But it's weird. I grew up on the east side of Cleveland, right, which is majority Black. I went to a majority Black high school. We learned about the Black Panthers in our school, but we were told that they were a, quote, Black power organization that wanted to oppress white people. What?
Nothing could be further from the truth. Like they worked with some questionable white organizations to build solidarity for the working class. That's ridiculous.
Actually, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, called Fred Hampton the most dangerous man in America because he was a man at 21 years old who could unite the Black liberation movement, the communist movement, and the peace movement. And you did that, and you have a revolution. I mean, we're not taught about any of these, Chris. We're not taught about the Communist Party, who was the first integrated political organization in the entire country, who began the Council for Civil Rights. We're not taught about the real W.E.B. Du Bois, who we at the Institute call the father of American Marxism. We're not taught any of that revolutionary history. We're given even like a watered down version of Black history, you know, when it's such an integral part of our nation's sort of becoming what it is today.
I think part of the reason why a lot of people may not realize that the majority of Cuba is that way, JB, is because of mainstream media and the entertainment business. If you notice, and this isn't just like a Cuba issue, you'll notice this in India as well. You'll notice this in Thailand. Like a lot of times, if you watch movies or TV shows where the character is Cuban or is, you know, Indian or, as well, Indian, Thailand, Asian, what they'll do is they tend to use the lighter skin people for those roles. That happens often with the Cuban roles that you see in Hollywood, the Bollywood movies. If you watch those, it's the same thing. But if you actually go to those countries, you realize, wait a minute, most of the people don't look like this.
Yeah,
And you'll see it a lot.
I remember. Okay, so I'm gonna be a little bit vulnerable right now, but I remember one time I was shooting my shot with this Indian dude, and he was darker than me. I was just like, "All right, what's up?" We were corresponding back and forth. He was fine as hell, but still, the thing is that a lot of people from these areas. Sorry, guys, but all straight people around me. But the thing is that it's just you realize that there's a lot of people that are like darker. Like for instance, like what you were saying. People even in Mexico, look at the telenovelas. They're all, they're all paper towel colored. So the thing is that they're out there, but at the same time, it's like the majority of people are, darker skinned because of the racist aspect. I want to share this as well because I think this is going to make everybody on this panel smile because I smile. I wanted to smile when I saw it. Here you go. You have Fidel Castro meeting and having a conversation with Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a black person and you have respect for somebody like Malcolm X, I want you to think about why the United States demonizes Cuba so much and why we as black people, especially, we should be looking at Palestinians in a different way. We should be looking at Cubans in a different way. We should be looking at China in a different way. We should looking at the Soviet Union in a different way, not the way that they want us to look at them. And we should also be looking at socialism and communism in a different way because that's rich in our history, right? One of the things that gets talked about, and I know Noah, you bring this up, was the great Paul Robeson. And what did Paul Robeson say about visiting the Soviet Union, if you can refresh my memory?
Do you remember, Eddie, off the top of your head?
It was the first time that he felt like a full man because he was given full rights. He had his rights written into the Constitution. They couldn't be ripped from him arbitrarily. He wasn't treated like a second-class citizen by the people or by the security forces or police forces. Unlike, of course, we know what was going on in the U.S. at that time with horrible racism systemically and interpersonally. So
I think that's something that we're often, we're never given this context of, we're told all these evil things about the Soviets, right? At the time, all these evil things are going on that are really just very normal things. America was an apartheid state, right? This was the era of Jim Crow and segregation. The USSR banned racism, made it illegal, punishable by death in a lot of cases.
Wow.
They did not mess around with that stuff. It was all about trying to get the working people working together in harmony. And over the years, this really begins snowballing,
Wow.
People have different experiences, or black people have had different experiences when they live in other countries. Even today, it's different. Like Nico was talking about the difference living in Brazil, compared to living in the United States. It's just a very different, because I guess also like Brazil, if you think about it, a lot of people there look like Nico.
Yeah.
For the most part, so it's different, but.
Well, another fact is that Brazil is the country with the highest African population in the Western Hemisphere.
There you go.
They got more black people in Brazil than the United States.
This is something I'm sure Jaybe could explain after the class, but where does our social consciousness and ideological sort of assumptions about how the world works come from? It comes from the economic base, how our society goes about being society. One of the big sort of things our ruling class gets wrong is that racism created slavery. But from the Marxist view, it's slavery that created racism. And this is unique in the U.S. context, right? In the Soviet Union, they didn't have this super brutal form of chattel slavery that we had here. So them experiencing this sort of advance of race relations at such a rapid pace just makes sense. The people weren't held back for a couple hundred years because of that, you know?
The Bolsheviks had to combat anti-Semitism, I believe, was the main problem with bigotry that was existing at the time, which was rampant across all of Europe and Eurasia. But
it's one of the reasons my grandparents loved the communists so much. They're Jews. They actually converted or Eastern Orthodoxy in order to hide from pogroms.
Well, one thing I was going to say, speaking of Castro died when he was 90 years old in 2016. And I'm actually surprised he lived that long because there were many attempts to assassinate Castro.
Yeah, they actually tried to literally get him with an exploding cigar, like a cartoon.
Some of the most ridiculous.
Like in Looney Tunes?
It's like a cartoon. There was also one where he liked to like go diving, or like snorkeling, and they wanted to set up like a barnacle that would explode if he swam up to it. Just like these ridiculous plans. But unfortunately, they did kill Che Guevara, who's another figure in Cuba. He's up on my clock there next to the photo of my head.
Yep.
But he's often demonized by Western propagandists. But if you look into the history of Che Guevara, you will never find somebody in human history who embodied the communist ethic or the struggle of the working class more than Che Guevara. Dude literally dedicated his life to it. The only reason the U.S. got him was because after the revolution in Cuba, he said, I'm going to go to the Congo and start a revolution there. It didn't work out. He's like, okay, I'm going to go to Bolivia and help with the revolution there. And that's when the CIA was finally able to track him down and kill him, where his last words were, shoot, coward, you're only killing a man. But an absolute Chad of the socialist struggle. Yeah.
The rest of that quote's just as beautiful. He says, the revolution lives on, the idea lives on.
Wow.
Yeah, we
I
talk a
wanna share
lot
this
about...
really quick too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean... I'm terrible with interrupting. I was just saying, we talk a lot about how we should sort of conduct ourselves as communists at the Institute. I wrote an article about it a while ago called Walking the Walk. But Che did this. Like these things we say we should be doing, Che was this. He's often underrated as a Marxist theorist, but he was absolutely brilliant with his theory as well. He has a theory they called the new socialist man, and how to create this new sort of higher level of social consciousness. It's really, really good if anyone's interested in reading after this.
For any of the LGBTQ people that may be watching, also from what I've heard, they actually apologize for how they treated queer people as well, multiple times, because they realized that they were wrong in that. I think it was Fidel Castro's niece, I think it's Mariela Castro. She was actually also very integral into realizing liberation for people who are queer as well in Cuba. And I'll be getting into that in a second. But I just wanted to share this video right now. This is Castro arriving in Harlem in New York. And he was greeted with cheers.
Castro! Bienvenido! And he's a nice man. He's a beautiful man. Yeah! Okay, all right, okay.
Es un mensaje para el pueblo de Harlem.
Dejarle mi eterno cariño por lo que hicieron por nosotros aquella vez. Hace 35 años. Cuando no teníamos un parar en Nueva York.
I wish I understood Spanish. This isn't subtitled though. But it just basically goes to show how a lot of people really, really appreciated, people like him. So, yeah.
There's
So here's,
Angela Davis back when she used to be radical.
yeah.
In Harlem, the historical memory of Fidel having met in the Teresa Hotel with Malcolm is still so much a part of Harlem culture that when I heard that he was planning to visit Harlem, I said, no matter where I am, anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, I will definitely try to be in Harlem.
Welcome to the Abyssinian Baptist Church, where we believe in truth and in justice and equality, and where we join with you in saying, Cuba, yes, blockade, no. God bless you.
I think this is what scares a lot of the corporate dictators. I think this scares them. Yeah. So,
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's like we know they lie about people like Malcolm X and black freedom fighters who were in Harlem and socialists and revolutionaries here in the U.S. So, of course, they're going to lie about our comrades abroad. Of course, they're going to lie about socialists internationally. And that's why I see it as kind of a betrayal to the international socialist movement when you have American Western socialists living within the comfort of the empire who are like F Cuba, F Che, F, all our Cuban comrades who are struggling for socialism. Like, you're buying into the bourgeois narratives about them rather than listening to the working classes of the world.
Yeah, that's something that I think we should really try to understand as one of the most important things. They are always, always, always going to give us different excuses for why we should break solidarity with each other, with people internationally, whatever it is. There's different excuses, right? They'll say, how could you want to ally with the working class in Cuba? Don't you know Che Guevara was homophobic? Right? Like, well, maybe, but he was a man of his time. What are they like right now? That's what's important. How has that progressed since then?
But so was people like Jefferson. Like, are we going to sit here and go, well, Jefferson was a great man? I'm like, he had slaves. Like, what? So my thing is, I was like, okay, yes, of course. But the thing is that a lot of people were homophobic back then. But a lot of them had changed their tune, especially later on. People still evolve and grow, and
we. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we've talked about how in America we inherited all of these racist attitudes from slavery, from the slave mode of production, and in Russia after the revolution, they inherited all these anti-Semitic attitudes that then needed to be combated. And in Cuba, they inherited a lot of homophobic attitudes from what's called in Latin and Central America, machismo. This idea that it's wrong to be feminine, or it's wrong to not have this masculine sort of presence about you. And that has been combated since by the revolution. As you said, they've apologized for it, and now they're, for liberation for different communities and different sexualities. And it's something that the revolution kind of had to course correct. And we're not saying any socialist experiment is perfect, but they're experiments. And if you look at them in comparison to the capitalist societies, they're much, much better on almost every level.
Yep.
Yeah. I actually wanted to share this as well because this came out in 2022. And I showed this before, but I have a larger audience on. I'm going to make sure I show this again. So this actually was passed, and it's called the Cuban Family Code Law. And so a lot of people really need to be abreast of what's going on there. Did I make this too large? Let me go down one. Okay. So it actually talks about how this new family code law is actually, it says, the most inclusive, progressive, and revolutionary law in Latin America, indeed the world, because of who it protects. So it says the family code, which passed by referendum on September 25th, so that's in a few days, so it have been a year. It says Cuban Constitution defines what families can be and guarantees equality for all types of family structures. It says Cuba is now one of 33 countries that recognize same-sex marriage, and one of roughly a dozen where LGBT discrimination is illegal. And so it says important provisions in the Cuban Family Code now legally protect families regardless of their makeup. People in vulnerable situations, such as those with motor, sensory, or mental health disabilities, unpaid youth, women, victims of domestic violence, and LGBT people, and all races, genders, and sexual orientations. The law gives support to institutions that protect families, home workers, and youth. It provides rights to anyone wanting to adopt or raise a child, and to non-commercial surrogate mothers, and provisions for family mediation. So this, and the thing is that it was a massive undertaking. It says a large percentage of Cubans, 74%, took part in the vote. They actually won with over 65% of the vote for this referendum. So this was massive, including gay marriage and things like that. And just to let people know, if anybody says anything, oh, Eddie had to leave. Thanks, Eddie.
I killed him. Sorry.
No, you didn't.
Carlos and I joke every time we used to do videos. Whenever he wasn't around, we'd always get, "Where's Eddie? Where's Eddie?" And we'd say like, "Oh, we have him tied up in the basement or whatever."
Oh my God, you killed Kitty, bastards!
It's a big deal, and it's sad because these type of things should just be bog standard. Like, we shouldn't even have to have a law about this, right?
Yeah.
It should just be how it is.
Yeah. And so just to let anybody know, also, you guys can actually read this in the National Institute of Health, where Cuba actually made gender-affirming care, medically gender-affirming care, legal, and they started instituting it back in the early 2000s so that transgender people can get transgender-affirming care in Cuba. And because they have free healthcare, they don't have to crowdfund for that type of care. So just letting you guys know that as well. That's how progressive Cuba is. Cuba is more socially and economically progressive than the United States. So when people talk about, oh my God, communism is so horrible. Well, why is it that people, especially the most disenfranchised, are doing great in countries like Cuba? I think that's something that people need to really ask the question about.
That's right.
Let me share this.
Well, it's
they have a longer life expectancy than we do in the U.S. too.
They do, as of like 10 years ago too, like a while ago. You know what I really, really like about the entire LGBT thing in Cuba is that it isn't this topic of division the way it is here, because they don't have our corporate media, right, that pits people against each other. They just have the media there who tells it like it is. And so they don't have this giant, like, everyone hating each other based on these wild distortions and all that about this, which we do here. And it's a giant impediment to class struggle many times,
Mm-hmm. Like, Here's the crazy part. Did you guys know that there are state-owned gay bars in Cuba?
Mm-hmm. State-owned?
State-owned gay bars in Cuba.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
because New Hampshire does have state-owned liquor stores.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They're the only place I know that has it, but it was kind of weird for me the first time I went there, and I was like, "What do you mean the state owns the liquor store?"
Yeah.
It was different.
They have that in Pennsylvania too. I lived in Pittsburgh for a while. They have the state store, they call it.
Oh, that's cool. Interesting.
Yeah. But, so that's things, it's really interesting, about Cuba. And so when it comes to, and I know I'm kind of focused on the identity aspect of it, but this just goes to show that when it comes to the communist or Marxist view of liberating people, it's liberating people so that they can be the most authentic version of themselves as long as it doesn't harm other people. And that's the point.